use cashless bail, like New York City, my former home city, have realized that all it creates is a turnstile for criminals to be arrested and go right back out on the streets. It decreases morale amongst law enforcement. And when it comes to law enforcement, and this is where I'm going to end, but when it comes to law enforcement, what we have seen is a massive decrease in morale amongst the people who serve every community in America. Law enforcement officers today, they're white, they're black, they're Hispanic. They come from these communities, they want to serve these communities, they truly believe in public safety. The Police Executive Research Forum found that a nationwide decline of 4.8% in police numbers compared to 3 years ago. People are leaving the profession of being a police officer and keeping our communities safe. Why? Because they're not getting the support from people like Kamala Harris and people like Tim Walz. So what happens to these communities if law enforcement isn't getting the support? Their ranks are decreasing. And when the ranks decrease, communities are less safe. More than 2,500 police officers resigned from the New York City Police Department in 2023, a 43% increase over the 2018 number of resignations, 43%. In Washington, D.C., the police force is at its smallest size in 50 years, amongst a staggering rise in carjackings and homicides. And all we need to do, go to a CVS, go to a Walgreens, go to a Duane Reade, and what you will find is that every common product, from lotion to toothpaste to deodorant to razors, they're all behind plexiglass now. And you have to get an associate. You got to ring the bell in the store. Everybody's seen it. If you go shopping, I go shopping, so I do my own shopping. You ring the little bell, it goes ding, ding, come to aisle, blah, 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 and you got to wait for somebody to come to that aisle, and then they unlock the case for you to get the items that you want to buy. That demonstrates how unsafe these communities are. And they are unsafe because of the radical policies of the Democrat Party led by Kamala Harris. One quick point on Governor Walz. Governor Walz, when the riots occurred in Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd, Tim Walz waited 4 days to call the National Guard. 4. He watched the city of Minneapolis burn. And quite frankly, what was burning, it wasn't the upper class neighborhoods of Minneapolis. It wasn't the suburbs of Minneapolis. What was burning? It was poor areas of Minneapolis, which mostly are inhabited by black people and Hispanic people. That's what was burning. Tim Walz didn't sit there and say, oh my gosh, these communities of color are in a real tragic state. We have to send every resource possible to protect those people who have small businesses, who have homes. He didn't do that. He watched it burn. It was only until the mayor of Minneapolis went public with the fact that he was getting no support from Governor Tim Walz, that's when Tim Walz decided to act. When everything had hit a crisis mode and there was no longer an ability to hide the inaction, that's when Tim Walz decided it was finally time to call for the National Guard. Taking a step back just from crime and public safety, we've seen this before from the Democrat Party. Joe Biden, who finally gave a speech last night, I don't know when he started, 11:30, who knows. It's a shame to do that to somebody. I'm going to stop there, Brian. I'm not going to continue. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Joe Biden's presidency has been one of, there are no actions until there's a crisis point and you, the press, start asking questions. And when you start asking questions, then they finally respond and say they're going to do something, whether it's true action or not. Kamala Harris, nowhere to be seen, whether as vice president or as a member of the Senate, until things hit a crisis point, like what happened with the defund the police movement. You see, the American people need to understand, Democrats today are trying to run away from the movement they embraced a short few years ago. And the only reason they're trying to run away from that movement is because the American people said this is craziness. And they demanded action from local law enforcement to keep them safe. And only when that occurred, then they want to reverse course. This is not leadership. This is putting your finger in the air and then figuring out which way the wind is blowing. Joe Biden has done that as president. Kamala Harris has done that as vice president. Tim Walz did that as governor of Minnesota. And the American people cannot tolerate having Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the White House doing the same thing for 4 more years. There's a better way. There is a significantly better way. And this is why police benevolent associations nationally and in different pockets around the country have come out and supported Donald J. Trump to be the 47th president of the United States. Because they know he takes public safety seriously. They know that he supports the men and women in blue who serve our communities every single day. They know that obviously our economy will be better, foreign policy will be better, the border will be secured. But at the end of the day, they know communities will be safe. And that is why they support Donald J. Trump. And that is why I'm here in Chicago, of course, to give my support for Donald Trump, but to also lay out the contrast. And it is a stark contrast between Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who take public safety seriously, and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who like to play politics with the safety of the American people. With that, I'll stop. We'll take whatever questions you got.
Thanks. Again, just raise your hand. We'll call you and then identify yourself. I will give one more housekeeping piece. We start again tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll have Congressman Mike Waltz talking about national security and military affairs. And Thursday, we will have Ambassador Carlos Trujillo and former presidential contender Vivek Ramaswamy to talk about a number of things, including immigration and the border crisis. With that, we'll start.
Congressman Ben Brookbaum, Real American Voice News.
Yeah.
What do you think is worse, Kamala and Joe lying about their record on the border, causing the invasion on our southern border, their support for BLM and the defund the police movement, Walz's open communism, or the mainstream media providing cover for them?
Well, look, I got to be honest with you. I think their record is abysmal. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris undid all of Donald Trump's border security provisions on day one. That's what they did. I mean, what is it now, Brian? 1,306 days ago they did this. They've not done anything to secure the southern border. But what's worse is when the press just doesn't report the facts. Look, I'm from New York City. I remember like the old cartoons growing up as a kid. Just the facts, man, just the facts. Well, just do that. Just lay out the fact of what occurred. They decided that what Donald Trump's provisions on the border, they decided that was the wrong way to go. What they have created is the largest humanitarian crisis in the history of our country. Well, not the history, because we've had some dark days in our history. Let me rephrase that. But one of the biggest ones, without a doubt. You have young girls who are being raped on the journey towards our southern border by the drug cartels and by the coyotes. That is happening. I thought Kamala Harris stood for women. I thought Joe Biden was compassionate. He's not. They've lost 85,000 kids. HHS has. 85,000 kids have just been lost in the United States. Where is their empathy now? The drug cartels are going to make $13 billion this year, trafficking people into the United States. That's just people. That's not narcotics. I thought they cared about public safety. Their policy is abysmal as far as I'm concerned. It is the worst public policy in the history of our country. That is why the American people, no matter your race, no matter your income levels, are all scratching their head and either A, saying, this is nuts, I want Donald J. Trump to be the next president, or B, and this is indicative of a black woman out of Philadelphia who was on with NBC the other day, talking about inflation and talking about who she really blames is the government. She didn't say who, she just says, I blame the federal government. And so you have two sets of people in our country, people who have looked at this situation and they've said, this is awful, I want to go a different way, or people who don't know who to blame, but they know it's awful. So we know about their agenda, but I think the thing that's more disheartening is the press doesn't want to cover it. or decides to cover vibes and joy. Joy and vibes isn't to put food on the table. I don't know what to tell you. You could be happy and you could be hungry all at the same time. Joy and food, joy does not provide security. Joy does not provide an economic vision. Joy does not provide peace on the Middle East. Go take your joy to the mullahs in Iran and see what happens to you. It doesn't work. What is required in this moment is true leadership. And we have that opportunity with Donald Trump. The New York Times, their famous slogan is democracy dies in darkness. Isn't that their slogan? Oops. Oh, is it the Washington Post? I don't know. It doesn't matter. Whichever one. What is more dark than the press, which has special protections under our Constitution, not reporting on one of the major political parties in our country? And this administration and what they've done. And when I say not reporting, I know you'll say, oh, well, we did a story. Come on, stop. That's not how this works. Are you going to do a story day in, day out? Are you going to continue to report it every single day so the American people get an opportunity to figure out what's happening? Because people are living lives, man. They're scrambling. They're going from point A to point B trying to figure things out on a day-to-day basis. It's the job of the press to make sure that they explain this. So, you with the handheld tie. Yeah, you. Yeah, you. What's your name?
Nick Gilbertson with Breitbart News.
Nick, how you doing?
All right. So, Congressman, you had an interesting comment there about joy, and this big presentation of joy last night. Just how can the Democrats purport to be the party of joy when their radical base, literally a couple hundred yards away from the United Center, is ripping down barricades because the party's failing to meet their demands?
I don't call them the party of joy. I think it's all fake. That's all politics. Look, you got presidential politics. They knifed Joe Biden. He's out. And now you have a situation where they're trying to rebrand Kamala Harris because she's been one of the more unlikable figures in national politics. The way I look at it is what you're witnessing with the Harris-Walz campaign is the PR buildup to one of those summer blockbusters. Everything is great. All the critics, meaning the press, are all giving it 3 stars and 4 stars. This is going to be it's going to have a great opening. People are excited. You see the trailers; those look good. And then people go see the movie, and they're like, "Man, this movie sucks." And I honestly believe that's what you're witnessing. So this whole joy thing, this whole vibes thing, all that is to cover up for the fact that their policies are a disaster for the American people. Look at the initial rollout last Friday from her economic plan. Price controls, like that's going to work? That's only failed everywhere. In the history of economics, it has always failed. But that's going to be the big solution for poor families in our country, for seniors on fixed incomes? No, it's not. Oh, how about this one? $25,000 for first-time home buyers? At one point, I was a first-time home buyer. Guess what happens when every first-time home buyer gets $25,000? The price of every home goes up $25,000. So it sounds good, but it doesn't do anything. She said the other day, I think it was yesterday she came out with it. She wants to have the corporate tax rate to be 28% from 21%. Well, that's going to go over well in a stagnating economy with stubbornly high inflation. It doesn't work. It sounds good. So my hope is that the American people don't fall for the joy and look at the facts, because the facts are stark, the facts are clear. Kamala Harris was riding shotgun with Joe Biden, creating the worst economic situation in a generation for working families in our country. Without a doubt, it is the worst. You're going to let her, you're going to give the keys of our economy to her over joy? Stop. That does not make any sense. We have a responsibility to lay out that case. My brother in the back with the glasses, how you doing?
Right here. Yeah. What's up, Brandon Poe, WCIU, Block Club, Chicago. I want to stick on the topic of crime. Former President Donald Trump has made clear that he intends to use the military when it comes to handling crime in major cities like Chicago, and doing that without coordinating exactly with local officials, using different constitutional provisions within the acts there. How could that possibly work, and is that going to be effective without local cooperation?
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to back up, because I want you to explain to me before I answer Where did that come from? Because I've listened to a lot of Donald Trump speeches. That one I've not heard.
Yeah, said it in 2022. He also said it in 2023 at a rally in Iowa. And then, according to the New York Times today, they have found they found an email with groups tied to Trump talking about using that exactly as well. But he said those exact words before. It's been sprinkled over a numerous amount of years as he's been in public life. So it's not the first time that ideas come about. People here in Chicago just would like to know how would that work possibly without local cooperation with the mayor, without the government.
Well, look, first of all, thank you for expanding on that one. First thing let me tell you is saying something at a rally is not public policy. It's not. Number two, if you go to his website, you're not going to find that written in stone on the website under what he's going to do to help solve crime issues. Number three, when President Trump was in the White House, nothing like this ever occurred. He worked with state and local officials to make sure that whatever support they needed, they received. And so when something gets brought up out of like a conversational tone, and you got to understand, listen, sometimes the president, he jokes on stage. He tells jokes, he likes to have fun. But when you look at the public policy that he supports, that is stuff that is written down. That is stuff that has been talked about with the campaign team. They've really engaged in that. That specific point you're raising has not really met that level. Last thing I'll say, emails from outside groups. I mean, there's so many outside groups in politics. They all have their own opinions, their own agendas, their own ideas. That doesn't mean it's going to hit the cutting room floor in terms of what's actually going to occur in a prospective Trump administration. For people who might have that concern, I would say go back and look at the previous Trump administration. Because in the previous Trump administration, what Donald Trump did is he supported local law enforcement, making sure they had anything that they needed so that they could be as effective as possible.
I got one more for you. When we were at the RNC, you and I talked a little bit about black voters, black support.
Yeah.
The state of the race at that point was a little bit different. Joe Biden was the candidate at
Yeah.
that point. And at that point, Donald Trump was on pace to field a historic amount of black support from the Democratic candidate.
Yeah.
Well, now recent polling has indicated that support is starting to field back away towards the Kamala Harris campaign. What needs to be done to regain that momentum with black voters from the Trump campaign?
So I say it's a great question. So two things. First, I wouldn't sit here and tell you that support is all peeled away yet. It's not peeled away yet. I mean, I was looking at polling the other day that showed his support amongst black voters anywhere from 15 to 17%, which is massively up over where it was in 2020, massively up over where it was in 2016, because black voters, in particular black male voters, are looking at the facts. They're not looking at the vibes and the joy. They're saying, okay, this is all cool, but what does this mean for me in building generational wealth and having safe communities and making sure we secure a border and making sure that I have the opportunities to thrive and succeed? You have a lot of black entrepreneurs in the digital asset space. Well, Kamala Harris doesn't even have a position on digital assets. Donald Trump has an ironed out position when it comes to digital assets. That's appealing to a lot of black men in particular, but people writ large. So what I would tell you right now is that the issue I think Kamala Harris is going to come against is that because she's not talking really to anybody, except when the teleprompter screens are up, people are getting skeptical, and they have every right to be skeptical. Because, okay, you want the big job, well, what are you going to do? Because making history, I made this comment to my mom a long time ago. I said, Mom, making history doesn't pay the bills. Making history doesn't keep the lights on. It just doesn't. Making history doesn't educate my kids. And I think that's where you have a lot of black voters starting to look at that. So I'm not concerned about President Trump's support. Now, in terms of what needs to be done, the second half of your question, I think just really locking in, taking time, spending time with business leaders in various cities in our country. The last time the president was in Atlanta, he had a business roundtable with black business owners before the rally started in Atlanta. Great event. They sat there and talked about the economy. They talked about regulation, where if you're a black entrepreneur, regulation is the number one barrier to entry for you to be successful. And if you're an existing small business owner, those same regulations, which Joe Biden and Kamala Harris increased to the tune of $1.4 trillion in one presidential term, that puts weights on your neck to be able to thrive as a business owner. So I would say, talking with black business owners around the country, engaging with black religious leaders around the country is the way to go to be prosperous, I think, with black people. Hold on, fellas, all put your hands down. Yes, ma'am, because I've asked 3 men questions, and that's just rude. My mama would get me.
Thanks for being here, Congressman. My name is Alexandria Jacobson. I'm with Raw Story.
Hi.
President Trump has a history of not always paying for bills related to security costs provided at
Finding is law enforcement officers all around the country support him. Now, with respect to the campaign pays its bills. I'll leave it at that. Next question. Yes, sir.
Law enforcement officials across the country and business owners tell us that retail theft and other crimes are up. Yet the data, according to some lawmakers at state and federal levels, doesn't support this. What role is underreporting playing? Partly because people don't call in because there's no consequences to crime? And how do we get back on a path toward public safety?
Well, 2 things to that question. Underreporting is a real concern because you have low morale amongst police officers around the country. And so people are already seeing that nothing's going to happen. So why even call the police? There's a report, and I don't want to get into too much details because I need to get into it and really understand the details, but there is a report about some cities not reporting all their crime data. Don't know. It's kind of out there in the ether. I think more work needs to be done on that. But when you have a lack of morale in cities surrounding police departments, police officers will be like, well, why would I arrest that guy when the DA is just going to turn around and cut him loose anyway? That doesn't even make any sense. It doesn't help anybody. And this is what's happening. I was with my sheriff in Lee County a couple days ago, and I asked him, how was staffing going? And he goes, I have more officers than I know what to do with. He goes, we keep getting officers in Lee County, Florida. Why is that? Because everybody from President Trump, Governor DeSantis, local leaders like myself, we all support our sheriffs and our local police. Our state attorney, she does her job, that when they bring cases to her, she goes and prosecutes them. So when law enforcement officials who are in other parts of the country hear that your service is actually valued and honored, like in a place in Lee County, Florida, Fort Myers, Florida, for the uninitiated about counties around the state of Florida. When you hear that as an officer, you say, man, why am I working in New York? I could be in Florida, and it's just better too. And so that's what people are doing. And so I think that the underreporting is a real phenomenon, because if people don't think their issues are going to get handled in a timely manner, what's the point of even dialing 911? They rather, unfortunately, you don't want people taking the law into their own hands, or people, unfortunately, are victimized, and there is no accountability for the perpetrator. Yes, ma'am, all the way in the back. Yes, ma'am.
So, about 800 feet away from the United Center, where President Biden spoke last night, we saw protesters successfully breach the perimeter. And it's just a month ago that an assassin tried to kill President Trump.
Right.
Has there been beefed up Secret Service around the Trump campaign? And given, there's this other report that an agent left duty to breastfeed her infant who should have been brought to the Trump rally, has there been ongoing concerns about the Trump campaign's personal security?
Well, look, what I'll do is I'll defer most of that to the Trump campaign. What I'll tell you is what I know, that yes, the security perimeter has been beefed up around the president. Listen, what happened in Pennsylvania, I try not to speculate on it, because this is more than just presidential politics. This is one of the core pillars of our nation and the future of our republic. All presidents, regardless if you agree with them or not, they deserve to be protected. All people under Secret Service care, they deserve to be protected. That care has to be handled appropriately. So I know around President Trump that there have been additional measures that have been put into place. I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to get into any more detail. With respect to the the gate that was taken down around the DNC, that's a serious concern. And I would say that's partly a security concern of how they're laying out the bubble over there around the United Center. It's also a bigger concern about the radical movement happening within the Democrat Party right now that has such a disdain for Israel and for the Jewish people that they would tear down security barriers around the Democrat nominees convention. That's a major issue for the Democrat Party to answer. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. Two quick ones.
Oh,
Democrats claim that Harris pocketed the ticket in the abortion issue. There's a lot of the South in play. North Carolina, Georgia, even Texas, and your home state of Florida.
Mhm.
What's your reaction to that idea?
my reaction is that's silliness. Look, they can say whatever they want, but I think the polling has been pretty consistent in every state that you're talking about. North Carolina has always been a very interesting state. We've battled over North Carolina, meaning Republicans and Democrats, the last several cycles, but Republicans have pulled it out. It takes work, there's no doubt about that, and we're committed to doing the same work for North Carolina. When it comes to Texas, Texas is going to be just fine. When it comes to Florida, I mean, come on, seriously? Florida is going to be just fine. It's going to come home for President Trump. Yes, sir.
Just quickly, President Trump is being criticized for rallying in Howell, Michigan today. Just last month, they had a couple of groups of pro-Nazi, pro-Hitler, whatever you want to call them, agitprop folks. Why select this town to visit, given the controversy?
I'm going to hand it to Brian, but I'm going to say something first. I don't know anything about some of these, I'm going to use your words, but what are they again?
They had swastika banners and had banners that said, "We love Democrats."
Okay. All those groups, that whoever did that is distasteful. I denounce them myself. I want nothing to do with them. But let me also tell you this. My brother-in-law lives in Howell. He's not some neo-Nazi. He's just trying to work hard and do the right thing. There are good people who live all across our country. And I'm not going to go down this whole, there are good Americans in every city in our country. So if President Trump decides to go somewhere to see the people who have been struggling under the terrible policies of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and he chooses to rally, that is a decision to support those people who love this country, who love our Constitution, who want all people to thrive and succeed. Any neo-Nazi crazy person that throws up swastikas, I don't want nothing to do with them, and neither does President Trump. I'm going to turn it over to Brian on that one.
I just would add a couple points. One is President Biden has been to Howell in recent years. Second to that, the same framing of the question could go to the Democrats, but of course they're not really taking questions. They're in a city surrounded by anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish protesters. They're going to blue cities and blue states throughout their campaign, talking in the same cities where anti-Semitic protests took over college campuses. So to the congressman's point, if you're not going to hold them accountable with a question, I think their answer would be the same. There are good people in every community in this country, and the community shouldn't be cast aside by a political campaign because of the abhorrent remarks of a selective few.
You've been patient with the bandana.
Yes.
Go ahead, man.
Thank you very much, Matthew Birdie, Breitbart News. Congressman, why is the leftist media so focused on 3 or 4 crazy protesters that no one's paying attention to, but they're ignoring the thousands of leftist protesters that are calling for a shutdown to the DNC?
It's mostly because a lot of the press is in the pocket of the Democrat Party. I wish it weren't the case, but it is. You know, I think, frankly, the press should just report even-handedly. But unfortunately, we have a lot of reporters who have a worldview that comes through in their reporting. It comes through in their questions. It comes through with what they choose to pay attention to. And then I also know a lot of reporters who actually try to do good things, but they have their editors back in main office who have a slanted worldview. And so that's why they choose to harp on 1 or 2, 3 people over there, but not the perimeter surrounding the Democrat National Convention, which is very concerning.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Do you think that Governor Tim Walz needs to apologize to the people of Minneapolis after he let that city burn?
Absolutely, he should. Like, you're the man in charge. Like, you're in charge. I mean, look, everybody gets to have their political viewpoints. I'm not going to take away from Tim Walz's political views. I disagree with them. I think they're very radical, but he's entitled to them. But when it talks about taking care of the people who are under your care as a governor of a state, you have a responsibility to put that stuff aside and do what's necessary for the people under your care. So he should apologize to him. Yes, sir.
Congressman, thanks for being here today. Rich Cioli from Talk Radio 1210 with a PhD in Philadelphia.
All right.
Those prosecutors that you talked about earlier, allowing crime to go up tremendously in our city. I want to talk about food deserts, though, particularly in
Sure.
black neighborhoods,
Sure.
poor neighborhoods, because how much do you think Kamala Harris's price gauging controls are going to lead to scarcity, grocery stores closing, and make it harder on these poor communities to be able to get fresh food?
Oh, it would be devastating for poor families, for poor communities. Look, when you engage in price controls, the first thing that just starts up is you have a shrinking supply. That's the first thing that occurs. And so I'm going to take my political hat off. I'm going to talk business for a moment, okay? When you're dealing with storefronts who have various levels of profit margins, the stores that typically struggle the most typically are inner city stores. They typically have the lowest profit margins because they typically they don't sell the high-end merchandise. They typically do not, because the community, the target market of that store, doesn't have the money to buy higher-end products. Higher-end products will give you larger profit margins. So if you have price controls, which shrinks supply for a store where they already aren't selling high-dollar merchandise because the people in that community can't afford it, what happens? That store closes. That's what's going to happen. Then you have poor people having to transport themselves to another community to go get food, in this particular case, because she wants to have price controls over food. That's what's going to occur. You're going to see these supermarket chains, in poorer communities will shut down at an even more rapid pace than they have already been shutting down. The other people that it hurts are non-corporate farmers. Black farmers, white farmers. They have 10 acres, 20 acres, 30 acres, and they're just doing whatever they can to make ends meet on their own farm, and they do a great job. But they don't have the volume of crops to be able to withstand the price pressures from Kamala Harris. So what happens? Their land goes out of production. They might have to switch to growing something else, which isn't your basic food stock that goes into any supermarket around the country. So it hurts those farmers who are non-corporate farmers. It hurts inner cities and low socioeconomic areas because they're not buying the high-end products to keep those stores open. So, look, if you're rich, yeah, you'll still get food because you buy other products, so your stores will remain open. There'll be a pipeline for you. But if you're poor, yeah, you're going to have bigger food deserts. You're not going to get the basic items that you need to survive. That's how dangerous a policy that is. And that's not me talking as a member of Congress. That's me talking as a guy who worked in finance for 17 years. And that's me talking as a guy who understands the economic history of price gouging controls, price gouging controls, etc. Let me talk quickly about the actual gouging. The only way true price gouging actually occurs is if somebody has a dominant market share, like 60, 70, 80%, or they have a dominant area control, meaning they're the only game in town for like 30 miles. Then you get to gouge. But every state in the country has price gouging laws. Florida has price gouging laws. So what she's trying to do is cover up for the fact that it is her vote in the U.S. Senate that unleashed the greatest inflation in our country in over 40 years. Kamala Harris did that with her vote. And to expound upon that, the reason why I know this is because in the Budget Committee back in 2021, right before the American Rescue Plan went to the floor, it was a budget reconciliation bill that came through the Budget Committee. Shalonda Young, the OMB director for the Biden-Harris White House, came into the Budget Committee. In the Budget Committee, we were examining the American Rescue Plan, and we told Shalonda Young that this plan was going to cause inflation because you're going to pay people to stay home. And when people are paid to stay home, there's not enough workers in the economy. And when that occurs, there's not enough people providing goods and services into the economy. So you have lower supply, but everybody was paid to stay home. So lower supply, but everybody has money. What's going to happen? Prices are going to go up. What happened? Prices went up. Kamala Harris did this to the American people. And now she comes out with a ridiculous economic policy that has failed everywhere it's tried. Yes, sir.
Josh Dawson from the Washington Post. Remember the speakers last night talked about Project 2025, including one who brought up on stage.
Yeah.
Who read from it. What do you make of the focus on that? You think that's a problem for the president? Why do you think they're talking about that so much?
It's not a problem for the president because the president's already on the record saying he has nothing to do with it. He has nothing to do with it. It's not on the campaign website for Donald J. Trump talking about what he's going to do. And let's be very clear. From the first Trump administration, when he was running in 2016, he laid out a couple of things that he was going to do, and he did them. So their focus on Project 2025 is insanity because they have nothing to run on. So they need to get a new boogeyman. It's unfortunate that campaigns do this, where they rely on boogeymen in order to scare people. But look, you have think tanks all across Washington, D.C. You have the Heritage Foundation. You also have the Center for American Progress. They're a think tank too. And they come up with policy ideas too. Just the Center for American Progress, their policy ideas are terrible and they don't work. But they do it too. And I'm quite sure that a prospective, because she's going to lose, but a prospective Harris administration will go to the Center of American Progress looking for policy ideas. The reality is, hold on, I'm going to say this. The reality is Project 2025 has no affiliation with the president's campaign or with what the president's ideas are going to be when it comes to getting our economy back on track and fixing our nation. And so the only person who seems to be wanting to rely on outside organizations for policy ideas is Kamala Harris, because she had to take no tax on tips from Donald Trump.
Yeah, I was talking to some Biden folks yesterday who say they think what polling shows, the more people are paying attention to Project 2025, and they think that argument, I guess, is working.
Listen, man, you could try to scare people with a lot of things. That doesn't mean it's a reality. Project 2025 is not going to fix inflation in this country. Donald Trump will. That's my message to the DNC. All right, last question. Yes, ma'am.
More broadly, a little bit on messaging. Obviously, the president is all over the country this week. A number of battlegrounds comes as a lot of the newer polls are super, super tight. What
Yeah.
do you think the messaging from the president needs to be on the trail this week? What are you looking for to say, hey, that's the winning message to pull away?
I think this election is really a choice election. It's a contrast election, even more so than some others. We have very stark differences with Kamala Harris. And I think it starts with the fact that Donald Trump has been president. And when he was president, everybody was thriving. By race, by economic category, you were thriving under his presidency. Kamala Harris wants to go back to Soviet-style price control policy, which does not work. It has never worked. Meanwhile, Donald Trump wants to lower regulations and cut taxes so the American people can thrive. Kamala Harris wants a wide-open southern border. The reason why I know this is because she's currently the border czar and she's done nothing to secure the southern border. She hasn't even been. She went to El Paso and hung out for about an hour, then got back on Air Force 2 and went on to California. Me, member of Congress, I've been to the border 5 times, the actual border. I've been in one of the gunboats on the Rio Grande, gone up and down the Rio Grande River. I know exactly what's going on, and I'm a second-term member of Congress. The sitting vice president took no initiative to actually get to understand all the dynamics of our border policy. Donald Trump will secure this border because he already did it once. And then foreign policy. There are 2 conflicts on the globe right now that have a true potential of turning into World War III. Who do the American people trust to bring these conflicts to an end? Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris has been sitting right next to Joe Biden. She was the last person in the room when we left Afghanistan, one of the worst, if not the worst withdrawal, from a foreign battlefield in the history of our country. When Donald Trump was president of the United States, peace was breaking out in the Middle East. There were no new conflicts. He was ending wars. He was taking care of our brave soldiers, making sure that they weren't put into harm's way unnecessarily. our adversaries knew that he meant business. So I had asked the American people, who do you trust to go and negotiate with Putin and Xi Jinping? Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? This is a contrast election. It's a stark election, but the choice is very, very clear. My own personal, and I'll leave it here, it's relative whether it's Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. Now it's Kamala Harris. You have the 45th administration and the 46th administration. Who did a better job? Who did a better job? And it's without a doubt, by any measure, that the presidency of Donald Trump was a significantly better job than under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And that's not me saying it. That's public polling saying it on every issue that actually matters, not the boogeyman issues brought up by the Democrats. Thank you, guys. Take it easy.